All right, folks, today is January of the year 2020, and this is Dub Crank, the artist, coming at you. Uh, I'm going to do a short talk today, and today's discussion is on male workplace discrimination, and that is being discrimination done towards males in the workplace. So, there's just a few points I'm going to cover on my notes, and then a little closing or maybe a big closing, and that'll be it. So let's get started. All right, so um, as always in all my talks, this is my opinion that I'm stating today. uh, First example I want to talk about is what we see today is girls clubs that are replacing boys clubs. So in the past, in American history, you would have groups of males that would form undefined clubs or unwritten or undocumented, just sort of almost like social clubs with employment where they would exclude females, and this would mean that the males would receive the benefit of the club. And when I say that, I'm not talking about like, a bowling club or some kind of, club. I just mean it's club is just a slang term that's used to mean, a grouping or a camaraderie or some form of just uh, of a group of people, like a clique being together that exclude other groups or a specific group of people. So in the past, you used to see it where there were what they would call them boys clubs, and it just meant that they kind of stuck together and they excluded the female employees, and they kind of put their authority or power together and use that as an advantage for themselves, which would work against female employees. So that's what you used to see in the past in traditional America, but you see that replaced today with female clubs or girls clubs, whereas boys clubs became unfashionable, unpopular, unethical, etc., illegal, and so they were phased out, and there's more laws that would uh, work towards equal opportunity to discourage that type of behavior. But in the time that I've existed in America, uh, America has switched over and it became more pro-female employment uh, since sometime in the 60s. And I've seen in my experiences with employers that now you see where there maybe would have been boys clubs, there are now girls clubs, and they do the same thing, only it's flipped around the other way. So instead of having a bunch of males coercing and you know having benefits for themselves while being prejudiced or exclusionary towards females, now you see it the other way around, and I've been on the other end of that. Um, so, and I'll mention a little bit more about my experience with that in a minute, but I want to mention another example uh, of physical discrimination against males. So when I was younger, I tried one time uh, getting employment at a hotel in Breckenridge, Colorado, and I was refused the position because I had longer hair as a male, where females were not refused a position who had the same length or longer hair, and that's discrimination. That's what gender discrimination is. And there's an idea in a culture, you could use America as the cultural example, but in any culture, there's an idea of what makes male and female, and I'll talk a little bit about that also as I go on. But suffice to say, for a male to have long hair was not considered a male behavior. And that's not a new behavior in my time. That's been going on since I don't know how far back, but of course everybody's familiar with the 70s and even the 60s with males having long hair. Excuse me. Um, but so I applied for this position. I had the interview and I was offered the job until the person noticed that my hair was longer. And it wasn't even that long. I mean, I had it in a ponytail in the back, and it was probably, just a little ways past my shoulders in a ponytail. And I was told I would have had to cut my hair in order to receive the position where you could go through the hotel and find females who would work there with long hair and had it in a ponytail. And as I said, as long or longer than mine, and were offered the position and given the position and were employed with the company, whereas I was turned down and rejected because of the same thing that females have, but because I had that and I was a male, I was discriminated against. So that's one example. Another one is sometime later, this was years later after that first example, I was also refused for the same reason a position with Domino's Pizza and as a delivery driver, and it was the same exact thing. I applied, I received an interview, I conducted a successful interview with the manager of Domino's, and I was applying for a delivery driver, and the manager had told me that I would have had to cut my hair, and my hair was shorter than it was at the first example of being in Breckenridge, Colorado. It was shorter than that, and I was told that their policy was that males couldn't have long hair because they didn't want to present that image. They didn't want people being frightened or having bad thoughts or bad feelings about a male driver who would look, the way that they were portraying that a male with long hair looked. So I was refused that position because I didn't cut my hair, and the same thing was in Breckenridge. I wouldn't cut my hair, so I was refused that position. And there were females who worked for Domino's at that same time who had obviously much longer hair than me, and they were allowed to get employed, be employed, and maintain employment even with their long hair. So that's my second example of male discrimination. Um, Another example is years ago I used to work for Arby's, the food chain, and this this particular Arby's in my state did run a girls club, like I talked about at the beginning, with how that works. And there was a district manager was female, and the manager of the store was female, and the not all managers, but most of the managers, assistant managers, I should say, of the store were female. And the surrounding stores that were under this district manager's command were all female. And so you had that girls club thing going on, just like I mentioned in the past I used to have with boys club. So you would see female favoritism, male discrimination practiced in the behaviors throughout that whole management ring. And I saw that in all the time that I worked there. And I also experienced male discrimination because of that fact of the girls club. And some of the examples of how I was discriminated against at that store, for example, on delivery days, they had a specific day that they would deliver or receive their truck deliveries, semi-truck deliveries for their roast beef. And of course, there are frozen French fries and all the other foods, anything else, frozen materials. And this was a heavy labor position to unload these trucks and then restock the items that you'd get into the freezers or any of the shelves if they were dry goods. And so when I worked there, I just happened to get scheduled, and I say happened, quote unquote, to get scheduled on the 1 day a week or the 2 days a week that the truck would do the delivery. And so, and then I would also be asked to do that all the time. Now, it's kind of a catch-22 for males because uh, being male, and I'll speak for other males, but I'm sure there are some that don't agree with me. But it's most males take a lot of pride in their physical abilities. You know, whether it's physical talents such as sports, or if it's just their size, or if it's just their energy level. You know, anything. It's just traditional for males to take pride in that, and so most males um, won't refuse to do the more of the labor positions because they that same reason, because they take that pride. For example, if you have a female and she doesn't get into being physically strong or showing off her physical prowess or athleticism, then for her uh, it's what you'd call, it's a burden, and it's looked down upon, you know, to do physical abilities. And I've seen that, you know, just to get off track, I've seen that all over in my employment my whole life, where males do physical positions because they take pride in being male, and most females in those same positions look at it as it's almost like an illness, you know, like asking somebody, hey, do you want the flu? Do you want this cold? I mean, most people would just be like, hey, get the hell away, you know, that. And that's kind of how most females respond to those physical demands from an employer for laborious positions. So, as I said, it's a catch-22 because I'm not going to turn it down to be offered those positions, like when I had to unload that truck, because just quite frankly, as a male, I often would prefer to do that than maybe to do some other duty, such as working with a customer or something, you know, because I get to work by myself doing the trucks. But suffice to say, or in spite of that, it still was something that was not my choice and something I did not set up, and it was consistently done that way to use me for that. And I did not see any females in the whole time I worked there ever have to do that uh, truck unloading that I did. So that's another example. I was also given the heavy labor tasks while I worked at Arby's that females were not, such as the pop changing with the big large box bags, or anything like garbage, anything that would be a heavier task that they would not give to females. And in another employer, at a different time, a large media retail employer, um, when I worked there, when it snowed and the semi truck driveway, which, if you know what a semi truck is, you know, it's a huge vehicle, and there's a driveway in the back with a garage door dock for them. And when that got shoveled in, and they didn't have time to get that plowed out with a plowing service, the manager of that store made us, the males in shipping and receiving, shovel that out by hand with shovels. And I ruined my dress shoes and leather shoes and that. And that's just another example of how males are put in positions that females are not expected or not asked to do. And uh, so, um, also another example is when I went to technical college at one point in my life. I attended as a student. I also applied for and received a work study, which means I had a part-time job at the school, and I applied for a work study in the library. And when I received that position and was getting started, I was told by the employees that they were happy to have me because they never get males uh, serving in that position, and that opened an opportunity for them to physically reorganize things so they could move things that were heavy or laborious, and they were happy that, you know, now they had a guy that could do that. And that was their first response to me being in there. So that's just another example of the same thing. So males are treated differently like that. So now I'm going to read from some points of my notes. Now that I've gone over, shared some of those examples with you from my life. So some things to think about with male employment discrimination. Traditional America used male traits or behaviors of males for benefit of women. So truck loading, street work, building trade, heavy labor industry, those are some examples. However, modern America punishes these same male behaviors when females don't like or want such behaviors. Uh, so modern workplace environments such as an office or a restaurant or a corporate setting. But on the flip side of that, female traits or female behaviors in modern environments are not punished when they work against males. For example, bitching, not following professionalism, derogatory addressing of males, personal attacks, emotional outbursts, and irrational addressing of males. So maybe I'll just go through that paragraph again a little bit. So yeah, there's also sexual harassment of males, which is I've seen where it's a hiring of males for their looks and what the expectations are of the male in that position. So I've seen that at jobs, and women will talk about that, the managers, female managers, that they hired a male because of the way he looks. And I've been in that position. It hasn't been told to me, but in my opinion, I was hired for those reasons, and I was also treated in a manner that indicated that the female who hired me or the females who worked there were either liked my appearance or had an interest in me, and that was obvious. It wasn't always a derogatory result of being hired for those reasons, but it does exist. So also when males are hired for positions and jobs that females don't or won't do, females are expecting equal pay. So females in the same male positions are allowed to forfeit their responsibilities of the same male job. However, males cannot forfeit those responsibilities. When females won't or can't do male labor job responsibilities, it's then considered, quote, job accommodation special needs, unquote. And the employer allows it, or they are accommodating to those female needs. But if or when a prospective male employee won't or can't do job labor responsibilities, he is either A, fired, or B, rejected as an applicant for the job. And females in white collar positions complain of unequal pay, of an unequal pay system. However, in blue collar, this is not true, just as I mentioned above. And I've seen that for many, many years, even decades, in America, where there's a constant complaint by representing female organizations or authority that it's an unequal pay system. But I've only ever seen that in my experience in white collar labor, white collar employment, because just like I had mentioned in blue collar, females are paid the same, but then they're also not expected to fulfill all the same responsibilities in those physical labor positions as a male is, whereas a male is either not hired or fired if he doesn't do them, whereas a female is given exceptions and quote unquote job accommodation special needs when they can't do it, almost as if they had a disability. Like if a job decides to hire somebody who's got a physical disability and they make special accommodations for that person to do the same job, it's looked at the same way with females doing males positions, physical positions. They're almost considered a disability that's given allowance, but there is no disability, and that's the problem. It creates this kind of gray line area where do you draw the line, you know? So, you know, if it's a special needs condition to be female doing a male job, then if I go work in an office or a traditional female position, now it should go the other way around too. I should receive special accommodations and conditions because I don't have classical or traditional female behaviors or traits. So that gives me a disability, you know, if you want to look at it like that. Okay, so that pretty much covers those points and my examples. So now I'm just going to do a closing talk about this discussion and reading from my notes, as I always do. So, although we are learning as a nation that gender is a cultural identification, nevertheless, there are distinct gender behavioral differences in male and females, traditionally and culturally. In the past, speaking about employment, male behaviors and traits were considered more valuable than female traits or behaviors, or than female employees. However, as America has progressed, we have seen for some time how female employees are now as or more valuable regarding employment. And we are seeing males today being punished for those same traditional male traits and behaviors. Male traits and behaviors such as aggression, anger, name calling, and sexually advancing behaviors. Yet females are continually allowed and permitted to display their gender traits and behaviors. And those female traits, such as arguing, unprofessional and emotional outbursts, personal attacks, fighting, abusive treatments, and sexually provocative behaviors and actions. So the reality is it goes both ways. And if males are punished for being males, then females need to be punished for being females. Otherwise, what you have to do is just treat both genders equally and work through all behaviors without singling out specifics. So in other words, if you're going to look at the specific behaviors of male employees and say, you know, a male employee is fired because of this or because of that, then you have to do the same for female behaviors. Otherwise, as I was saying, you should really just look at it all and say that, you know, if you've got issues with employees, whether male or female, you should work through each of those issues and deal with those, and not specifically look at them gender in a gender class, because then that's when you start getting into that problem with discrimination. And I saw that all the time in all my jobs, physical labor, where male behaviors such as, like I indicated in here, you know, if a male gets mad, he might use name calling, or he might have a more aggressive response, even though it's not physical violence. And males in those positions, in those situations, were almost always or were always fired and terminated immediately. Where in the reverse, where females displayed their traditional behaviors of unprofessionalism and the emotional bursts and attacking and being personal and inciting fights or direct actions to start a fight, there's never any consequences because the management will be female, and they will always think of, they see themselves, it's a mirror response, like looking in the mirror, and they feel immediate empathy that that could have been me behaving that way, so I'm not going to punish or fire her for that. But when they see behaviors they don't like in males, it brings up, in my opinion, it brings up those feelings inside those females of all the things they never liked about males, and also all the anger they have about the differences in society of males and females. And so then they use that against males and abuse their position and take that out on males. I did work at a place one time where there was a boys club, and I wouldn't say that I was a part of that, but because I was a male while that happened, I would probably be associated with that. But there was a male manager, district manager, and he, in my opinion, he did show a likeness or favoritism towards male employees. And so consequently, I could tell I was liked by him, and I could tell the other male employees were liked by him, and I never saw him mistreat female employees. But one female employee who was, I think she was a management, she had explained to me one time that that he was abusive towards her verbally, and that the things that she said, how he treated her, would indicate to me that she wasn't being treated the same as the male employees. So, and I believe her, and I think that that was true. I don't know the extent of it, but I did see that also that way. So I'm pointing that out. Um, and before I go into closing, or my last statement on this talk, I just want to point out an off-topic example that, and this doesn't have anything to do with employers, but I just thought it was interesting to mention that when I was in high school, one of my best friends decided to wear my sister's dress to school, just because, I mean, we were of alternative variety as individuals, and punks, and rebellious, um, and rebels and that. So it was part of our style. So his reason was just to throw a wrench in the system, basically, and do something that's not expected and that's different. And as a male, when he wore female's clothing to school, he was stopped. He was uh, forced to go to the principal's office. This was high school, and he was forced to leave school. He was not allowed to be attending school while he wore that dress, and he was told he had to go home and change, and then he could not come back unless he changed, and he could not wear that dress. And that was the mid 1980s. So some of you who are younger than me will think, well, that was eons ago. It wasn't a long time ago. But, and also people will use that for an excuse. Oh, that doesn't go on, which that is a bad excuse for just about everything when it comes to history, because that's not true at all. Uh, but I thought that was interesting to point out in this discussion, and also point out the fact that today you will see Muslim males wearing dresses all the time to school or to employment, and I don't know, but I don't believe they are refused any of those facilities or asked to leave and change and that sort of thing. So some of that does not have to do with employers. It's more about cultures in times, but I just wanted to show that that's, as we talked about physical features of male discrimination in employment, like my long hair, uh, one could only imagine if my friend would have tried to wear that dress to any of these employers that I got refused employment with for my long hair, he would also have been refused employment, I'm sure. So finally, I just want to say that in society, all businesses should see employees as quote unquote employees and not quote unquote male or quote unquote female. Today, women do male jobs and males have long hair or earrings, and males should never be refused employment or fired for displaying the same physical traits associated with female employees, whom are not fired for such traits, as I was. Thank you. This is Dub Crank, and I hope you learned something about this from the discussion or got something out of it. Thanks.